Hello and welcome to the MUN podcast. My name's Alex, as usual, and I'm here joined today by a very special guest, all the way from the American University in Washington D.C. We have Munya Yusuf. Munya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's our pleasure, and this is super cool because I know we are growing in the United States because, I don't want to talk too much about mymun now, but for obvious reasons, anybody who knows mymun knows why. But originally, we are from Europe, and a lot of people who follow us are from Europe. So I think it's going to be super interesting to learn about your American perspective, and I think you guys have a super unique conference as well. So we're going to talk about a little bit of your background in US MUNing and your conference, which is AmeriMUNC. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, AmeriMUNC.
AmeriMUNC. This is one thing I love about American conferences, the way you pronounce your sort of short names. I can rarely figure it out.
I think the funniest thing is how they pronounce MUN as well. They don't call it MUN anymore. They just like to announce everything as a word itself as well. MUN.
Interesting. Yeah, and then you get like sea money, sea monkey. We get Namun, which they pronounce Naaman. Then we have Nymun, which I think they pronounce also Naaman.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, there's a lot of fun to be had just in American conference naming. You are the American university though, so you are AmeriMUNC.
Mm-hmm.
But before we talk about the conference too much, Munya, you're SG of the whole thing.
Yes.
SG of the MUN at the American University in Washington D.C. How did you get there? How does one get your job?
Well, the funny thing is I did Model UN. So I'm originally from Bahrain, as context for everyone else. I'm from the Middle East. Once I was applying to colleges in the United States, a huge thing for me was looking at what their IR, International Relations school, offered. And they had a huge section just about Model UN. And like everyone else in high school, Model UN, we lived it, we breathed it, went to as many conferences as possible. So when I heard about it and I went to the info session, I was like, this is something that I would be interested in doing. Could be a good way to make friends. I started off as a chair, and then I worked more on the substantive side. So I kept progressing year after year.
Nice.
Where I served as under director general, then director general. And then the crazy part about how they do it here, I don't know if it's so much different than Europe. Back home, it was more of an interview, and like the faculty advisor would get to pick. Here, it was more of an election. So the entire IR society had to vote for who the next Secretary General is.
We did it the same way at our society, actually, in Germany.
Okay, so for
that's
me...
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and we have a large IR society, so we're over 200 students in it, and we're divided into different branches that are kind of like Model UN, but encompass other parts of IR. But yeah, I got voted in.
So did you have to run a whole campaign, make posters? What was your campaign budget?
So we actually weren't allowed to campaign. It had to be hush-hush, and it had to be just one speech and a couple questions, and people vote on their morals, I guess.
So no bribes, nothing?
Unfortunately not.
Because that's how usually, I feel like in our societies in Germany, that's how, the elections happen, but really the decisions are made at the beer table the weeks before.
Yeah.
So who's going to do it? Nice. But did you, congrats, obviously.
Thank you.
But I don't suppose that was your start to Model UN, or did you do in Bahrain Model UN already before that?
Yes, so I started Model UN in 10th grade, not in 9th grade. Bahrain usually does it from high school. I was completely nervous. I was so shy, didn't want to public speak. My friends pressured me because they were on the admin team for our school's conference. And then from my opening speech, I fell in love with Model UN and did it from 10th to 12th grade, which was fun.
Nice. Wow, and then you went to the US, and there things escalated a bit at the American University. Nice, but okay, but you say in Bahrain normally people start doing MUN in ninth grade.
Yes.
So is that like, I mean, I have no idea of Bahrainian MUN culture. Is that like every school does that, or is it were you at like an American school, or how does it? Is that literally every school?
So, a lot of the private schools host the Model UN conferences. They're led and ran by high school students. And like, as someone who was there, there's so much passion and love and admiration for Model UN, considering that we're such a tiny country. But
Yeah.
there's like 12 conferences a year from that small country, and everyone gets to go. And because you kind of see everyone, you know everyone, so you build such a beautiful community because you quite literally know everyone who does Model UN.
That sounds so cool.
Yeah, and even like a couple months ago, I staffed a conference that a college was actually, the American University Bahrain was hosting back home, that my friends led. And it was so crazy seeing people that I knew 5 years ago and then people that I've never seen. And again, joined by the same love for Model UN.
Wow, that's so cool. So I don't know. I've never heard anybody honestly going to Bahrain for an MUN conference. Maybe my circle is just too small, but is it also a place where you get a bunch of internationals or rather less?
Usually people from the Gulf. So I remember when
Okay.
I was SecGen in Bahrain, we had a lot of Saudis come in, a lot of Kuwaitis as well. We also have one Feynman affiliated conference, and I feel like that usually garners more international students.
Okay. Interesting. So imagine now we have a college student listening here, very intrigued by this whole Bahrain situation. Is there a conference you can recommend people to go to?
Unfortunately, there isn't a collegiate circuit back home. That's something that I would love to bring back. We had a conference called MUN, which was the Bahrain Mall United Nations Conference.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so hopefully if that gets revitalized, keep an eye lookout. But it's unfortunately just high school centric right now.
Okay. Well, I mean, lots of opportunity. So, just in case anybody else wants to get something started, I'm sure Munya would be a great partner to bring a massive delegation from the American University as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. Awesome. And I mean, so you started doing MUN. Did you keep doing MUN mostly because it was a great opportunity to socialize, or was there anything else that like you were like, oh, this is my life now? Like,
I think in the beginning, I just wanted to find a community. Like I was traveling across the world for school. I didn't know anyone in Washington,
Right.
D.C. And I just thought it was an easy space to like it. Model UN is nice because we all can relate to similar experiences. We can all relate to that power del or resolution that we worked on that failed. We can all bond over that special moment that redefined what Model UN meant to us.
Right.
So I thought it would be an easy way to integrate more in the United States. And then it just stuck through the blood, sweat, tears, and the hundreds of hours poured in. I just found it hard to leave. It became, honestly, my team, our past like predecessing secretariat teams have become my home, my second family, my role models. I see them every single day. I practically live with them, and it really does become like a family. So, and you don't usually leave family, so you stay through everything.
True. Oh, interesting. I think that family perspective and spending so much time with those people, I think that's an interesting component that plays into why MUN becomes such an integral part to so many people. Like, because I find it often hard to nail down or identify why I'm still involved with it. So many people who stick with it for so many years. But yeah, maybe it is that you build that sort of second family where no matter where you are in the world, you still have your local friends and your international friends that you can you're just so close with for, I don't know, you just go through those difficult times during those intense weeks, and maybe it's that I think that would be like a whole I don't know, sociology a master thesis of its own to figure out why some people stick with MUN forever.
Honestly, Model UN can be a disease. You just stay, it never leaves, but it's such a beautiful thing as well.
It is. Oh, damn. Anyway, okay, here we are. We're stuck with Model UN. Now, the American University MUN conference. Let's talk about your conference. You are the SG of that. Firstly, wow. Secondly, you're in Washington D.C. and what we've seen at mymun is sometimes we have weeks where there's like 2 conferences registering from Washington D.C. And then there's a week where there's 3 registering, and I'm like, what is going on in Washington D.C.? How many conferences are there? How can you talk a bit about the scene in D.C. and how you guys fit in there?
Yeah, sure. I think like to anyone who lives in DC or visited, you recognize that politics and international relations run this entire city. I have friends who are public health majors, biology majors that are still involved with what politics are, because as you walk around, there's a protest going on. And I think that really drives the passion for Model UN in DC, especially within the students that grew up in the area. Big kudos to a lot of our beautiful, beautiful sister conferences in DC, from the ones in Georgetown with NICSIC and NAMUN, the one with GW and other colleges. I think it just shows the amount of passion of the different college students willing to, one, have that experience recreated for the DC students, but also recognizing that there's so many opportunities to bring Model UN to a different level in DC. You have embassies left and right, you have global initiatives, you have the World Bank and the IMF on the same street. There are so many things going on that really help elevate these conferences to the next level. And I really think, like, don't get me wrong, American University carries 2 different conferences at the same time for high school students, but at the same time, every single conference shows a completely different side based on what I think is part of what their university's message is and what they choose to collaborate with in the DC area.
Interesting. That's so cool. I mean, just you talking about it now, it sounds like DC is like this perfect breeding ground for Model UN and having a passion for IR. And I suppose it makes sense where, I mean, for a long time and probably still, America is sort of the center of foreign policy, if you want to think about it like that, or like a foreign policy that tries to connect with other countries in one way or another. For me, as a European person who has been to the US for a Model UN twice, we always think of New York, right? Because that's where you have the UNHQ, and I feel like there is 2 conferences happening in each hotel every day. But is that right, or are we missing Washington there completely because you don't have the UNHQ?
I will say you are completely missing out on Washington, D.C. I get it. The UN, the General Assembly Hall, is such a fascinating thing to see. But I think there's so much more to global diplomacy than what the United Nations institutions are. We see, yes, right, 194 countries collaborating together. But a part of that global effort is the different embassies, the different foreign service, the different smaller institution, different think tanks that help you, that educate you on different crises and different conflicts that are occurring. And I think what DC has to offer is a lower scale version of what happens in other places in the world and different institutions in the world. Yeah.
Like what, for example?
We had our staff visit the United States Institute of Peace. It's a research and think tank that works on peace building. And what they got to meet is different ambassadors, different peace builders and workers in the actual field working in conflicts within our specific region, which I know we'll talk about a bit later. You get to interact with ambassadors that talk to you about what they are doing, what their countries are doing from their own perspective. And you really get that localized I don't want to call it a tunnel, but more of a one-on-one experience on what other countries think, in a hub where every single country is trying to spread their interests, or every single country is trying to collaborate together for a better world in their eyes.
Would you say, in terms of IR and diplomacy and foreign policy and stuff, there is more getting done in Washington D.C. than there is in New York?
I mean, the problem... It's such a difficult question because with New York, you have the hub of multilateralism with the UN being like, all of us are here on the same mission. Whereas I feel like in DC, every single country is on their own mission. And what I think you see more is every country's identity, every country's culture, every country's initiatives and desires and goals being presented. And it is up for the third parties within the countries themselves and you is to see where all of that melts together rather than just seeing them as a block of countries, is what I'd like to say.
Interesting. And now, I suppose in New York, you have this benefit of, I think, all the major and most of the minor nations as well having some sort of representation for the UN. I imagine in DC you have still almost all those countries are represented as well to have an embassy to the US. I remember you talking about this, you mentioned it just now a little bit with the think tanks, but I think in our last call, when we talked about your conference on MUN, you mentioned as well that there's just so much opportunity in connecting people with ambassadors and things like that. What is that like then in DC as well?
Yeah, it's so fantastic to be here. I think you get to humanize these people in positions. Like, don't get me wrong, every single time I meet a new ambassador, I'm like, oh my God, you're so big. And they're like, we're actually normal people and we want to talk to you. There is that effort of, they want to talk about a specific issue they're passionate about. They want to talk about their own country. They want to talk about a conflict that's going on that is important to them. And you see the same thing with think tanks, major think tanks like the Council of Foreign Relations, USIP. You think of them as huge blocks. They're usually the people that supply the information to the world on what's happening, but their desire and will to educate the youth is so inspiring. We have a sister branch at American University. They're called Ask a Diplomat, and they quite literally just send emails to ambassadors and to embassies, and they come free will to talk to us about anything, any topic. We've had ambassadors talk about the Arctic. We've had ambassadors talk about, we had the Kurdish ambassador, for example, talk about the situation in Kurdistan. We had the Bahraini ambassador talk about cryptocurrency out of all conversations. So
that's okay.
I think what you get to see is that ambassadors are people too, and people that work in these think tanks are people too. So it's really nice to see their effort and desire to bring forth how important these topics are.
That's really cool. I mean, I didn't want to switch completely to AmeriMUNC yet, but I imagine that also means that an opening ceremony or something at your conference looks a lot like a big panel of big ambassadors.
Yeah, last year we had the administrator, Her Excellency Samantha Power. She was the past U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She's also now the director of USAID. And she was so fantastic talking about her efforts in the Indo-Pacific and everything that the U.S. is doing. But we've also had like lower scale panels that we've offered with a bunch of different ambassadors, with just one ambassador, with different people coming and talking about their think tanks. And I think that exposure to people actually practicing the topics that you're discussing is so important to bring out not only realistic resolutions, but to really gain and hone in on that academic element of Model UN.
That's pretty cool. So do you think this is also like, as an MUN club or as an IR society in Washington D.C., do you think this being tied into a bit more with those embassies and those think tanks, is there also a sort of a predefined recruitment effort from their side, or something that sort of gives people like you in positions like yours sort of a natural way to progress out of university into those places where you're dreaming of going?
I think it's a little bit of both. We've had like alumni panels that have come and said, yeah, we had one event and we asked a couple questions and that gave us an internship opportunity. But I think more than that, it shows you the breadth of IR. I think like growing up, I thought IR was just, you work at the UN and that's it.
Yeah.
But having talks and talking to different people in the field in completely different positions opens your eyes to what is offered and how to be a better contributor to the international community. We've had, I think once I started studying IR, I saw people going into consulting, into researching, some people going into the foreign service. So you get to see that there is so much more than what you thought the actual sector is.
That's really cool. So I imagine then if somebody were to decide to go to AmeriMUNC, they could get a little bit of a piece of that and get this insight into what an IR career might look like.
I guess we're so excited to continue the initiatives we've had in the past, and we're looking to expand to things not just to people who want to attend AmeriMUNC, also to people who want to gain that experience, because we think it's important to remove that barrier and increase accessibility to our initiatives as well.
I think that's going to be super interesting, especially as we talk maybe a little bit more about your conference in a second, but just this is really why I was also so keen to talk to you in this podcast now, is because of the way you described your conference in our last call, with such a passion and to where you provide also this context that you're set in this sort of greater Washington D.C. diplomacy sphere space, where I imagine, I mean, MUN is always fun, right? Yeah, no doubt, no debating it. But at the same time, I think it can make such a big difference who's organizing the conference and sort of what's the background of the conference and what is that conference set in. And that is not to say that, you need to only go to conferences that are by prestigious universities, so long as the group there has a passion, that goes a long way. But at the same time, thinking sort of back to my New York conference example, I feel like there's so many conferences in New York because that's where the UNHQ is, and because people from all around the world, they hear of New York, they've seen it in YouTube videos or I don't know, in movies, and you think, oh, New York, and Empire State of Mind is probably not on the current people's generation anymore, but certainly for me, when I was flying over there, I was thinking of that. But then again, if it's just a more or less generic conference that happens to be in New York City, then that's just a location. And maybe if you desperately want to look at a city, okay, whatever, go. But for the conference to actually have a deeper sort of meaning, and for you to really connect with something that sort of goes beyond you just being in a place, then I think maybe it might be very interesting to go to Washington. And though not having been there ever, my visit to New York in the past has been I don't know, it's very dense. I live in the countryside. There are certain smells in New York sometimes. There's a lot of people. It's not always the nicest place. Go to conference in New York, it's very cool, but at the same time, I think I'm starting to see where the appeal for Washington is coming from.
I mean, you're always invited to AmeriMUNC. We'll have a spot reserved for you.
We're going to end the podcast now. I'm going to go on Google Flights now. No, okay, so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to come up with an itinerary for people that they can go to a conference in New York and in Washington. So everybody's going to be happy, and you can actually make your trip to the US worthwhile, because you're realistically not just going to stay there for a 3-day conference in New York, but you're going to do more, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. Let's talk about your conference then now. It seems to be in a fantastic place for doing a conference, fantastic environment. You seem to be passionate about it. If you have to describe it, what is it gonna? Assume I'm gonna come. What is it gonna feel like for me to be at AmeriMUNC?
Well, in the words of our delegates, you drive into American University. You're literally driving past embassies. You come onto our campus. You see different foreign policy people in the United States. You see what some people saw Dr. Anthony Fauci walking around on campus. You really get to experience that hub of what it truly means to be in such a diplomatic sphere. You walk into AmeriMUNC and we say, welcome to our regional focus. We hope to continue expanding on what it means to be such integrated into a specific region. But what you also get to see is a plethora of diversity, and honestly, like a huge passion for what this conference tends to mean. I commend our staffers so much for the efforts that they put, because it's not easy pulling a conference in any scale. But what I would hope for you to experience when you come to AmeriMUNC is not only a passion for Model UN, but a love for actually doing and a love for actually educating. Because I think that's always what's most important to us, is we put the education as the number one thing, the number one detail about our own identity.
Right. I love that. That goes such a long way because at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, because you've experienced it more than I have, but my experience, especially with sort of American circuit conferences, is that it's nearly almost violently competitive, and putting that focus above all on the education, people going there to develop and learn. I think that's super valuable.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Our staffers tend to be competitive. I mean, we are staffed by our Model UN collegiate team, which just officially, as of I think 2 days ago, they are #1 again for the second year in a row in North America. So we do have that. You can get to see a little bit of that competitive edge. But yes, we have awards. But what we really try to do is destigmatize the competitiveness of Model UN, because realistically, you're looking at 75% of our attendees are usually first timers. Especially with COVID, there was a new push into people who've never done Model UN before. And what happens is through the resources, through our staff support to those students, a lot of those students tend to top their committees. So we try our best to promote that education through pre-conference workshops, through before the actual conference, because we also recognize that Model UN is not really accessible. Not everyone financially can do Model UN. So we really try to make sure that we are doing as best as our can to spread out that message, not just to our attendees, and that's the most important thing. Most of our initiatives this year are not just for people who are coming to AmeriMUNC. It's for everyone who has a passion for Model UN.
Awesome. So essentially, even if I can't make it across the pond to attend the conference, I could still be part of your sort of pre-conference training stuff.
Yes, so we launched a delegate mailing list, which anyone can register on our website. That's just AmeriMUNC.com. And what we're trying to do is offer those resources, hopefully offer seminars with ambassadors, fingers crossed, because sometimes people in the Foreign Service tend to be a little wary about like recorded sessions. But we're really trying to push that forward. We have another conference at American University. It's called WORK. It's the Washington International Relations Conference.
By the way, that's WIRC.
Yes, lots of different names. But they are so fantastic in the fact that it's a hybrid conference. So what we do is that they have an in-person session and an online session where it's just one day. You go through different workshops, you go through a round of simulations, and we're hoping to have a speaker panel. And it's $10. So you get to experience that education. And get that experience in a simulation for a full day for such a low cost. But that's what we try to do. We try to push everything outwards for everyone who wants to learn more and who wants to experience things. Because it's the same with our staffers. A lot of our staffers have had those barriers to Model UN in the past, whether it was financially, whether it was a lot of schools here don't really support a Model UN program, which we continue working to destigmatize that idea. So we try our best to give the most that you could possibly get from a conference.
Awesome. That sounds so cool. I mean, it seems like you think not just in terms of this 4-day conference or 3-day conference, but sort of very holistically, if I may use that almost overused word in at least in management culture. You are about a 900,000 people conference, if I'm not mistaken.
900, not 9,000.
No, 900 to 1,000.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, 9,000. That would be a lot. That would be a whole little city, wouldn't it?
That would be bigger than my hometown in Bahrain. That would be a lot.
It would be twice my village, where I come from in Germany.
That would be a lot of people.
Damn. Yeah. So 900, I think that's a lovely number. It's large, but still, you see people twice during the conference, which is cool. What makes you guys special? There's a lot of conferences in the US. You mentioned that there's a lot of conference in Washington. Beyond sort of your holistic view, this whole training, etc., what makes you guys stand out?
Sure. So the one thing, I think that's the idea or the notion about AmeriMUNC that everyone clings on to, is that we describe ourselves as one interconnected, realistic universe. Unlike a lot of other Model UN conferences, we hone in on one specific region every year. So this year, for the first time in our 11 years, which is absolutely insane,
You're not
we
that
are
young after all.
No, we're entering our 11th year. We're preteen era right now.
Time to grow a beard soon. Or not
No,
if you're a
for
woman, or either one, or somewhere on the
if you want to
spectrum.
grow facial hair, you can grow facial hair.
No, I can't. Anyway, go ahead.
So we define ourselves as a regional interconnected universe. What that means is every single year we pick a region. So this year we're doing the African region, mainly under Sub-Saharan Africa. But what we do is every single committee has to be part of that region. Every single initiative for the year has to pertain to that region as much as possible. And what that promotes is an intercultural understanding of IR, of politics, of diplomacy, outside of just multilateralism. On top of that, we really hone in on being a smaller conference. Typically, conferences in the United States, I was shocked to hear this from small town Bahrain, to hear that there are committees with 300 delegates.
Yeah.
My high school was barely 300 students.
That's
So
crazy, yeah.
we cap our crisis committees to 20, we cap our GA committees to 40. And that what allows is that smaller GAs, maybe 50. But
Yeah.
what we really hope to do is that hope to give the opportunity for every single person to attend. And we also provide a smaller setting for newcomers to feel more comfortable in participating. And in that way,
That's so
our
valuable.
smaller ratio between staffers and delegates is lessened, and you really get to hone in on the experience that we have. But as delegates coming in, you get to experience every single part of Model UN on a more hyperfixated and like a closer lens.
Right. Yeah, this is something that I think when we talked to MUN as well, that they were talking about the smaller committees, and I feel like over the last little bit, this has been almost a trend I've seen with some conferences, that I think Lyman here on the European side has been sort of trending towards that. WorldMUN hasn't, but I think if you want to have an intense experience at a conference, it's very hard to have that if you're in a 300-person committee. You know, the chances of you getting to speak at all are very slim, and
Yeah.
of course diplomacy and modern it's not just about who speaks the most, but if you get to speak, it's a great opportunity to learn public speaking.
Exactly.
If you don't get to speak, you're definitely not going to learn it, no matter whether it's valuable in the UN or not. So I want to applaud you, and I know it's truly it makes it a huge administrative and sort of managerial effort almost to coordinate so many committees, but I have no doubt that people will appreciate it. And if I think about traveling, spending several $100 on a flight or dollars, or going to that conference and knowing that I will have a delegate experience where I can actually engage and take away a lot from, other than the socials, then that brings so much value to me being confident in sending the application.
Yeah, and on top of that, like outside of just public speaking, what we try to do is promote the idea of mutual understanding and understanding people's experiences, especially once we're trying to bring a diverse body or a group of delegates, whether it's we have such a dedicated base from Guatemala, we have students coming in from Northeast, from the West, from the South, from Canada, from Italy. And I personally, as what you said, like the person who often starts the initiatives, there's a lot of passion from their end. Coming into American University as a student from Bahrain, from the Middle East, who never lived anywhere else,
Right.
I think the idea of communicating to different cultures and to different people and learning from their experiences is so important.
Right.
And we even have like a diplomacy award that nobody else can decide except the committee. It has to be like a vote,
Nice.
a consensus vote. And it's supposed to be someone who represents and prioritizes learning, communication, understanding, and respect over winning.
I love that.
Yeah, and I think the world would be so much better if we just listened to each other a little bit more.
Yeah, this is why we have this sort of almost cliche feeling vision at mymun of every student in the world doing at least one Mod UN conference in their sort of educational, not career, what you call it, journey. Because if everybody does it, no matter what domain you're in, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an engineer, it's gonna allow you to just communicate so much more efficiently. and to also understand the things that are going on in the world around you is with so much more empathy, I suppose, that I think we as a world population could benefit from that tremendously.
No, for sure.
It's big words. Anyway, so you touched on it briefly earlier. The interconnectivity, your one interconnected conference or universe, you mentioned even. So I'm wondering whether you have several planets as well. No, probably not. But we have some conferences. I remember in Budapest they had a conference as well, which was focused on interconnectivity. I've seen several different formats trying to do that. What does that look like at your conference? What does it mean to be in this interconnected universe?
So at AmeriMUNC, we're a little bit crazy. We have 30-something committees that operate under one universe, as you said. And what that means is, one, we achieve that by having smaller style committees. So you can be in a super localized style committee like the Cabinet of the United States. Let's just I don't want to touch on the committees in the region this year just to keep them as a surprise. So I'll do the ones from last year.
We're gonna have to subscribe to the delegate newsletter for that.
Exactly. And you have to be a registered account on mymun as well. We'll do it as a little deal as well.
There you go.
But you could be in the Cabinet of the United States. You can be in the Cabinet of China. Last year we had Huawei Technologies. We had the Pakistan Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is their military cabinet. Yeah. And what that happens is with every single note that you pass, with every single directive, that specific solution or action that you are seeking will affect every single person in our 30-something conference. So it gets really hectic because we have people, you may be in your committees debating, but we have people running around, calling left and right, trying to get those actions to replicate in every single conference. We do that within our specific regional focus to really promote the idea of what it actually means to be in diplomacy. Because realistically, whatever action another country takes will immediately affect someone else, especially if the topic is related to them. So we spend a lot of our time picking topics, picking committees, picking whatever it is we want to offer, because we try to do topics that are more localized and committees that are more localized within our region, so you wouldn't have the opportunity to debate within them in other conferences. But with that, we try to bridge things together. I could tell you about my simulation team. We spent days in our school drawing the map of Africa and being this is here, this is there, this is there. How are we going to bridge everything together, just to give them a more of a memorable and a realistic experience. We also have a dedicated press corps committee. Love the delegates in that committee. They get a Twitter page and they get our website, and they will upload things that are happening in all of the different committees. So you get a glimpse of we have the news people commenting about what's happening, and then you as the people on the forefront debating and trying to discuss solutions for each. So
is that press committee essentially also how I as a GA committee would learn about something that my Pakistani chief of staff of the military debated or something?
Yeah, unfortunately with GA it's harder to get them into the crisis, especially with random updates left and right. But what we're trying to do this year is to promote more of that outside of just getting updates on Twitter or getting updates on the website. So fingers crossed things work this year. GA delegates you'll have to see. But yeah, we're trying to, you really feel like you're in crisis mode left and right. I remember last year I was running around and trying to get things and fixing small minute problems that obviously happen when you're planning things. And then on the right, I would hear someone yelling at the cabinet of Japan about something. And then on the left, I'd hear Samsung Technologies talk about the chip wars in Asia. So it was really interesting. And it's a cool space to be in. It is. Our staffers are crazy. Required to staff AmeriMUNC, you must be creative and crazy in order to do it.
How many people do you have in your backroom staff?
So we do 2 chairs for every committee. So we're looking at 70-something chairs. And then for our crisis committees, we try to get between 5 to 7. Because we close the gap between crisis in terms of the updates and the notes. I know that usually conferences do between a 30 to 45 minute run, like every 30 to 45 minutes. We try to make that faster. So what we try to give each staffer 3 delegates. So they can respond to the delegates as fast as possible,
really cool, yeah.
give them feedback as much as possible. And at the same time, more staffers are more fun. You get to see the craziest things happen, more acting, especially
to me,
in
that
the
sounds
crisis
like
side
the
of
most
things.
fun committee to be in, the crisis staff room.
Yeah, I will say, unfortunately, I was a chair for my staff year. It was also virtual, so didn't get to see much. But crisis is definitely where to be. So we're looking at between 150 plus crisis staffers. And I will give them my all for the things that they do during the conference. Last year, they brought a boat because we had the strait, the Malacca Strait. So they were just like, they just had a boat. And they were like, here's our piracy moment. It was great.
I love it. So the big question then, are you still taking crisis staff applications?
Yes, Alex. Whatever crisis, I'll send you the list and you get to pick which ones you want to staff in.
Interesting. Okay, that's interesting for me, but also the people listening to the podcast, no offense to anybody, but you are the big mymun and modular nerds. So maybe it's interesting for them as well. So maybe reach out to Munya about whether there might be an interesting spot for you. I know some very talented people listen to this sometimes. Awesome. So this is actually something I wanted to ask you about earlier, because you already touched on it. The GA versus crisis challenge. And I feel like this has also been a challenge for conferences here, Europe side, that try to do interconnectivity, and anytime I hear GA and crisis, I get a bit of a heart attack, because I feel like, to me, GA, the way you debate, it's sort of a sort of progression from beginning of debate to the end where you vote on your resolution. It's sort of a natural progression based on a status quo on a topic that you have, and in reality, within your 3-day time span or 4-day time span, most likely, whatever conflict or situation you're looking at won't change that much that you would have to sort of change the premise of your debate, which the RPs also usually aren't designed for. So how do you account for the GAs still having a good experience and not feeling like, oh, our progress in the last 2 days is thrown out the window now because the Pakistani cabinet decided to, I don't know, become a fundamental democracy like Switzerland is, or something like that?
No, that's such a valid question. It's something that I've working on the substantive side, building the conference for the past 2 years before I acquired this position. It's the most difficult task, I will say this. What we try to do to give a bit more leverage to both blocks is, one, we remove the element of war in crisis.
Okay, nice.
Typically in crisis committees, there's a lot of military intervention that gets thrown left and right, a lot of craziness, and we really hone in onto our realisticness here and our school's message. So we're in the hub of the American University School of International Service. They've been saying they've been waging peace since the 40s or the 50s. We call this on the same message. We try to give you a realistic experience in crisis with the crisis tools. And I think that, number one, telling the students we're not focusing on war, we're focusing on solutions, but within a crisis ROP scheme, really helps push the message and makes it a lot easier for the GAs to feel part of the conference as well. Another element is when I talked about it takes a lot of time to get topics for AmeriMUNC because we want to make sure that everything fits, because one wrong topic throws off the entire interconnected universe. So for our GAs, what we try to do is we give them topics related to the region, but we make sure that it's just a few factors that overlap with the other topics in the crisis committees.
Okay.
So they'll get a glimpse of what is happening and they can utilize what is happening as preventative measures in their resolutions. But we also don't want a delegate to feel like 3 days of work just got thrown out because somebody decided to bomb something or somebody decided to send a military whatever to invade a specific country or a specific unit. So we get rid of that element. So you have that GA idea of collaboration, cooperation within the crisis scheme. So they're not unilateral, because even with crisis, like we have our JCCs, which are the Joint Crisis Committees, obviously, that are like 6, 4, 3, 2, 2, and then the independents. But having them all focus on collaboration within their own scheme and then within the greater region helps. And removing that uncertainness makes it easier for GA and for crisis to integrate better together.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said 6, 4, 3, 2, 2, and then the independence.
Yes.
What are you talking about? I have no idea what you mean.
So AmeriMUNC has a lot of crisis committees. We are a
Yeah.
crisis-centric conference, but in the typical Americans, I guess I've never done Model UN in Europe, so no European MUN fans, please do not attack me for this. But I personally have never heard of JCCs. Have you?
Yeah, we do them. I
Okay.
organized a few actually. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. In the Middle East, we don't do them.
Fair enough.
So we have a 6-way JCC, which is our usual. It's there every single year.
Okay.
6 cabinets. Their focus is always some sort of national security or economic cooperation within the region. That's like, for our returning delegates, easy to guess what committees and what countries are going to be in that cabinet. And then for the rest of our JCCs, we usually have a 4-way or maybe a 3-way or maybe a 2-way. Those are definitely like smaller scope. So for last year, our 3-way was the Malacca Strait. So it was Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia. In our 2-way, we had the Pakistan Joint Chiefs of Staff and then the Pakistan Parliament. So you get the smaller and larger. You get to see the play between public and private sector within the smaller JCCs. And then for our independents, they're just one crisis committee that doesn't have to like respond to another crisis committee necessarily. This could be your UN Security Council. This could be our advanced crisis committees. This could be our International Court of Justice. This could be, I'm forgetting which one, our Midnight Crisis Committee. So they still play within the region, but their main focus is what they have to do as a committee rather than a larger cooperative effort.
Right. That sounds really cool. Okay, now I understand. Thank you. It makes a lot of sense. So I usually found 3 to be kind of a sweet spot of being very well manageable from a background crisis perspective, while still being super interesting for the participants, because you have to you can build this triangle dynamic where it's not evident who your opponent maybe is or who you might collaborate with, and it provides interesting dynamics. What's your view on that when you, with a 2, like the one-on-one, like the 2 ways JCCs? Do you think that's still, like, does it take away because it's quite evident who your counterplayer is?
Yes and no. I think the nice things about 3-way is I'm a 3-way. I love me a good 3-way. I just think I love odd numbers. I love that it's great. It offers there's always going to be someone opposing the other 2, which I appreciate. Right. But what I think the beauty with a 2-way is that it will only work in a linear 2 bilateral situation. So you can't put a topic that has more than 2 stakeholders generally in a 2-way, because then you're going to have delegates bringing in the other stakeholders and you don't have that representation. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and you have to simulate it, and it's a nightmare.
Yeah, my favorite 2-ways are either small government oppositions or public versus private, because I just think that relationship works, whether it's producer consumer, private company versus government, whether it's larger government and in a people-led opposition. Those type of things work. But I will say the 6-ways can get really fun, especially if you build them right.
It's
if you
been
make
one of
sure...
my favorite conferences as well, doing a 6-way. Oh, that was... I think we debated it was on the Arctic, and it was a lot of fun. It's a lot of work for the back room and a challenge, but
yeah,
if it goes well...
Yeah, we usually put the most people in the 6-way just because you really need to understand what's happening, but also make sure that you can balance things well through communication.
I think it's also one of the coolest things if you want to grow your, I don't want to say management skills, but your, I don't know, being in the back room for a 6-way crisis. I think you can learn and grow a lot from that, just because by nature of so many different things happening, you have to in your mind bring so many things together and think of so many things. So just from a learning experience, not on a debate or delegate side or diplomacy side, but on a how to work in stressful situations as just work with a group of people collaboratively. I think that's a really cool experience.
Yeah.
I know it's gonna be a surprise, but I wanna still maybe get a little bit something out of you about your topical focus, that being Africa. Maybe you also don't have all the details yet, but we once did a JCC that I was the crisis backroom master, whatever you call that person, head of crisis for. And we had, I think, I'm looking at it now, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, and then Uganda simulated around some sort of terrorism issue, which was very, very fun because you have all those rebel groups. And I was looking at the Uppsala conflict data set to sort of come up with interesting storylines. Can you tease a little bit sort of what's going to be spicy about the African continent at the conference?
Well, I will say there's no terrorism. We recognize, I know terrorist topics are so fun to debate. I think our biggest caution, we've never done the African simulation just because we've always been scared of the stereotypes that have with the region, and we want to do the region justice, especially with its history. I will say there's some silly, goofy topics, like topics where you'd be like, what is this? Like, I'm pretty sure our staffers were also, our leadership team, like once me and the simulation people talked this through and showed them the draft, they were like, no, we can't be doing this. It doesn't make any sense. What is this? There's like, I would say 3 committees, one two-way JCC. That's pretty weird, pretty interesting, but we think it will give a little bit, it's for the creative delegates that want to challenge.
Nice. I mean, look, especially, so I didn't mention it earlier, but I love the fact that you're just ruling out war as sort of a crisis simulated scenario fundamentally, because I feel like so many crises just sort of drift off into that, and then it's not very productive anymore. It still obviously makes you use and develop interesting and valuable skills, but it's a whole different thing than sort of the diplomacy focus that you would ideally have. And I guess there are so many interesting dynamics on that continent to discover for so many people, and I'm very intrigued to see what your topics are going to be and sort of on what dynamics you're gonna pick on. How did you come up with, like, it sounds like you have the topics already, so how did you come up with them? Did you work with like any, I don't know, interesting professors, think tanks, ambassadors, or how did you research? Because I imagine for me, I studied in my bachelor's, at least I did politics as well, and we never touched anything, well, barely anything that would have been interesting for that. How did you come up with those detailed topics then?
Yeah, it's a little mix of everything. So what I love about our school is that everyone has to pick a regional focus if you want to go on with an IR degree, and that's a specific focus that you have to specialize in. So you get to see within our school that there's a lot of professors within their departments that would be so open to talking about, and we appreciate them so much because they also come. This is another part of our conference. I'm so sorry. They come to talk to the delegates and they give them feedback on their resolutions. So we pick professors that are specialized in each topic.
That's awesome.
So we've had certain people that have taken classes with specific professors and talked to them. Honestly, like, it's so funny. So this year we have 2 DGs and 2 SDs just because we think the conference has gotten so big. We need more hands on deck with the simulation to make it more smoothly, to let it go more smoothly. To the people who, like, there's the director general, which is like the obvious dais, but we have someone of the same stature for the crisis side of things.
Awesome. Yeah.
So honestly, there was a point where we asked for topic selections and proposals from the chairs and the crisis staffers that are staffing AmeriMUNC early in the summer. We've asked topic proposals from our leadership teams, but the process really, like, I love my team. We were in a room and we searched for news and we were like, what is happening in Africa today? And we just like hyperlink till we saw something that was interesting.
Awesome.
And we just like continued developing certain topics. There's some things that are like, what I appreciate is that you have the general health, education, environment topics, but they're reformed into a way that you would probably haven't debated them before, is what I want to say.
Awesome. Yeah. And it gives you the chance as well, like by going off actual topics, you have that base reality to be inspired, but then because it's a crisis, you can still take it into interesting directions, which allow you to just spice it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Awesome. We have talked for 55 minutes, which is wild. I feel like the time has gone like this. I saw one thing on your website which I wanted to still ask you about. It said Midnight Crisis. I am very intrigued. What is up with that?
So it was an initiative introduced last year by our simulation directors, which I love them so much for that. We get approval from teachers first. Teachers have to sign. We choose one committee that's the more advanced or the more niched committee. Last year we did a simulated forum between ASEAN and SARC that doesn't exist, but we told them, you guys are going to have to cooperate and see what are the barriers of this new relationship. So we got approval from teachers. Don't worry, we don't just knock on delegates' doors. And the delegates kind of know it's going to happen because we don't want to wake anyone up at midnight. But we go to them, we knock on their doors, and we're like, oh my God, it's a new crisis. You guys have to solve right now. And they just like walk on downstairs. I remember last year I was part of the acting gig where we were like looking so serious and so mad at them, taking fake pictures, making them be like, what is happening? And we just did like a cute little twist. They got a lot of snacks from the Indo-Pacific because it was the region, which are always fun. But we let them debate at 12 a.m. in the morning until like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. But
okay, so not too long.
No, we want to respect their time as well. I don't
Fair enough.
Like they've been debating from morning to night. You know what I mean? But it's like we do more fun things within the midnight crisis rather than just like hard debate. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So whoever likes to be woken up at midnight, no, it just sounds honestly, it sounds like so thrilling and exhilarating, and I'm sure nobody at all sleeps before that, and is just ready in their suits, in their beds, to get it going.
I mean, it's right after the delegate dance, so they're like pumped up. They've had fun. God. They've danced a little bit. They play a little bit of board games. They go to bed. We knock on them 20 minutes later, being like, "Hey guys, come back downstairs."
It sounds like the ultimate experience. I'm not gonna lie. Not to forget. So there's one more thing. You mentioned delegate dance. What else is the conference about? So we've talked about academics a lot, but conference is more obviously than that. What about your socials? What about the delegate package as well? Like what can I expect at the conference that just in terms of amenities makes me happy?
Yeah, so we're definitely expanding on those this year. I think last year was our great transition period from our first conference in like 3 years. So we made sure everything was like minimal. We wanted to see what was working, what wasn't. This year, we're trying to do a lot more fun things. So the hint is just make sure you're looking at every single thing in the conference because we're trying to really push forward what it actually means to be part of it. A huge thing, it's not really a huge thing, but what I completely love doing is we have a coffee shop at AU that's based in our IR school that is so great. I love it. It's called the DAV. It's so fun to be there. But they're actually doing a drink of the month for our smaller conference work and for AmeriMUNC. So during the months of November or February, if you're attending either conference, you could get a specialty drink that's catered just to the conference. It's going to be a little exclusive. And the proceeds are going to our charity of the year that we're partnering this year to kind of push forward our philanthropic mission towards the region. So we absorb the fun things from you, we absorb the topics from you, but we want to give back to smaller initiatives, especially smaller charities that are doing a lot of great work. We're continue collaborating with our smaller cultural affinity groups at AU. So last year we were partnering with a lot of the Asian Society, the Asian American Union, I think that's what it's called, the Muslim Student Association, a lot of like cultural initiatives to bring forward a more cultural and realistic understanding of what the region is to be.
That's really
Obviously,
cool.
The delegate mailing list is going to have great fun features, especially with like smaller competitions. You could possibly get one of your designs to be a part of AmeriMUNC is what I will say. Get some news on what's happening in Africa today, just to give more of a humanizing effort towards the region. Oh, I'm trying to think. Within even our Del dance, if you're not an extrovert that doesn't like to dance, I totally understand. We have another room that's just like board games. We had a
That's
poker.
cool.
Yeah, we had a poker table. There was no real money. It was just like chips. It was not real money.
Still cool.
But a lot of delegates learn how to play poker. You know, that could be a great skill if you're into, I don't know, James Bond. Like if you want to really be that.
You can impress people with your chips and your suit. There you go.
Exactly.
One more question surrounding that. What about the food situation? I'm always concerned with the food situation. Where's lunch? What about lunch?
So we cater,
Nice.
which is great. So I know this year we're trying to work with more local restaurants in DC. Last year we were definitely working with a lot of like staple, staple chains that everyone knows in the United States. We're trying to work with smaller restaurants that are more likely to cater. If you don't like those options, the catering menu does come out earlier. There is a lot of restaurants on campus and outside of campus, just a mere 4-minute walk.
That's really cool. Yeah, no, I've just spent conferences walking half an hour from a conference center, desperately in search of food in my 45-minute conference break. So I always ask, and I feel like it just adds so much when you can just, without having to worry about it, just go with your committee, have lunch, discuss all the important matters of diplomacy and not have to worry about food. So that's really cool to hear.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And again, no one needs a cranky delegate. I don't need to be cranky. The delegates don't need to be cranky. Got to make sure that everyone's feeling good for the conference.
Yeah, my pro tip for anybody going to any conference, from the sound of it, not yours, but never forget your Cliff Bars or any other cereal bar, because they save you many times.
Yes, please. Honestly, especially during committee, the amount of times I've had delegates feel dizzy, please eat something. Really important to make sure that you're feeling healthy.
Just to be sure, take a Cliff Bar and some water in a reusable bottle.
Honestly, I think Cliff Bar should advertise to is it to the MUN or to the MUN? Or is it?
To the moon.
To the MUN, okay.
To the moon, because then you can do the whole joke with like,
yeah,
it's the moon, but it's also like
the MUN.
MUN. And in German, if you in German, the pronunciation of, like, you know how you say MUN, it's the Germans say MUN.
Oh, okay, wait, that's so interesting. Because Jonas, when he first reached out to me, he was like, "Your name is so great if you love Model UN, because it's Munya." And I've heard this joke since 10th grade.
I love it.
So I love a good pun. And AmeriMUNC, we do Ameri everything. So like our meetings are on Mondays, so they're Ameri Mondays. The Del Dance is Ameri Bash or Ameri Gala or Ameri Dance. Everything is Ameri something. We love a good pun.
It's so much creativity, so much passion for the conference. Did we miss anything to talk about before we wrap it up?
Let me see. There's so much going on. We have a delegate closet if anyone doesn't have any business attire that we've collected, washed, deodorized. So
this is one of the coolest things I've heard so far.
Yeah, you could reach out. We'll also make sure that like access to those forms will be on our delegate mailing list as well, or contact anyone on Secretariat. What am I missing? Oh my God, there's so many things happening. We have framework. We teach students in DC how to do Model UN from our Model UN team, from how to create your own team, how to create your own conference. There's a lot going on, guys. Just follow our social media, follow mymun social media. I love their reels about things that happen in Model UN.
Bea, shout out to you.
No, really, that's how I discovered mymun. I love those reels so much. But yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, for sure. AmeriMUNC.com for your website. You can also find them obviously on mymun. Just type Ameri or AME into the search bar on the front page, and you're gonna find them already. The conference is happening next year in February, so perfect time now to get it scoped out and start looking at flights if you're on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. I think, Pacific is towards Hawaii and Japan and stuff like that. I think,
No, for sure. Get those registrations in. We're almost full.
Awesome. Well, time to get on it then. All right, Munya, it was such a pleasure to talk to you. It was a lot of fun learning about the conference. I'm very tempted to come swing by next February. And yeah, let's go to the moon together.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much for mymun. Thank you for everyone who's listening. Stay tuned for everything mymun has to offer. They're so great. Please continue on this mission. I love this organization.